I have notes. And the reason that I have notes is that I had this presentation down a month ago and I'd practiced it like 50 times. And then 2 days ago at 2 a.m, I wake up with like the idea. And I'm like, yes, this is it. And I jump out of bed and I like get a pen, I'm like writing this stuff down. And the pen dies and I throw the pen away and I'm like running around the house looking for another pen and I'm writing more stuff down. And that kind of leads me to today where I've only had 2 days to practice my presentation. So there's notes just in case I forget, I think we'll be right. But the idea that I had, what came to me, my presentation is the identity principle. Thank you. And it occurred to me that I am now, and I always have been, a storyteller. And that makes sense when you think about identity, because what is identity if not a set of stories we tell ourselves about who we are, and then another set of stories, sometimes quite different, that we tell the rest of the world about who we are. So I'm going to tell you about the identity principle through a series of stories. Now, note on this before I start. Some of these stories are real and some of them are made up. Some of them are mine and some of them have been borrowed from family, friends and folklore. I suggest not trying too hard to figure out which one is which. Just enjoy it all as allegory and there's a point to it. So I once knew this girl named Freya. I once knew a girl named Freya and she was born into a world into which she was never really going to fit. You see, Freya had this almost frightening surety that she was destined to achieve great things. Now, as you can imagine, at the age of, 8, 9, this made her not really fit in with the other kids around her. So she spent a lot of time reading books and living in this world of absolutes, right, where the good guys were white and the bad guys were black, and right, fair and just always prevailed. So basically the exact opposite to the world she was actually living in. At the age of 12, when she graduated primary school, she went to her first real grown-up party. So the first party that wasn't like sleepovers and new kids on the block and chocolate crackles. So she really wanted to fit in because she hadn't fit in before. And so she went to this party thinking, I want to be liked, I want to be liked. But when she got there, the first thing that happened was she got offered a cigarette. And her need to be right was not quite as strong, need to be liked was not quite as strong as her need to do the right thing. So she turned it down. Then the same thing happened when she was offered alcohol and eventually drugs at the age of 12. Eventually, a man twice her age asked her to go into a room with him to watch a movie, at which point she made a panicked phone call to her father and he came and picked her up. Not all of her friends made the same decision that night. Now, that totally freaked her out because she just could not understand why anybody would want to do something that was so obviously wrong, not to mention gross. So through high school, she retreated even more into herself and became even more shy, and she spent most of her time alone in her bedroom, reading books, listening to music. But strangely, what she fantasized about when she finally got out of the hellhole that was her life was being on a stage. Now, she had different ideas of what this might be, like singing or acting or speaking. Like she wasn't really quite sure. She just had this idea that this was what she was going to end up doing. So if we look at the first quadrant of the identity principle, which is know, it's about knowing who you are. Visions don't have to be specific. Yeah, Freya's vision, because she truly believed that she was destined for greater things, it didn't matter that she didn't know exactly what that was. It gave her the strength to turn down things that she knew were going to be bad for her, drugs and cigarettes and underage sex, and allowed her to get through those situations without too many problems. The second bit is values, and values are basically determined by the questions that we ask ourselves, yeah? In Freya's case, these questions were asked of her really, really, really publicly, and she had to take a stand for what she believed in. And the third part is planning, and again, planning doesn't have to be specific, and we've all been hit over the head with this idea of goal setting and putting timelines on things, and not that there's not a place for that, but when we're looking about who we are, on a bigger scale, when we're talking about planning, we're talking about knowing we have bigger things and just preparing for that situation and to allow the things that are supposed to happen to us. So I knew this guy, and his name was Joe. And Joe's life was perfect up until the age of 9. Doubt. Aha. Until the age of 9 when his parents got divorced. So I just want you to think about this for a second. And some of you have probably been through a fairly similar situation. You're 9. Your whole life is falling apart. And of course, you think it's your fault, because at the age of 9, you're not physically or chemically capable of understanding that there's stuff outside of you. So you walk into this room, right? And you've got your mother sitting on one side, and your father sitting on the other. And you have to stand there and tell them, their lawyers, and the mediator who you love more. The fact that it's even legal to do that to children is disgusting. So understandably, this kind of messed Joe up a little bit. And his anger... One day, after being really disconnected from the world and having that flow into the way that he treated other people, he woke up and looked around him and saw all of these men who were 20 years older than him, 45, still sleeping with 19-year-olds and having one-night stands. And he asked himself, is this really where I'm going to be when I'm 45? So then he started asking himself more awesome questions. Like, hold on, what if everything that happened in my life wasn't my fault? What if I was just a kid who got stuffed up by parents who weren't thinking about anybody but themselves? So one day he's going through some documents and he finds a photo. He looks at this photo and it's got him and his parents from before the divorce. And he starts to realise that maybe there is a way that he can forgive his parents, because when he looks at them, he realises that they're just people. And in the time between the divorce and now, he's learned a lot about them and their stories, about how they were both outcasts in their own family, and how they came together, and the whole point of their marriage was to find love and acceptance from another person, but neither of them was ready to give that, they were just expecting to get it. So of course, when that didn't work, what's the most next sensible thing to do? Have a child who has to give you unconditional love and acceptance. Never occurred to them that perhaps that child would require unconditional love and acceptance. But he realised at the same time that they weren't responsible for his behaviour. He realised that the acts perpetrated by him and the acts perpetrated on him were two very separate things. In one case, he was an unwilling victim. In the other case, he'd made decisions that had led him to hurt other people. So the second part of the identity principle is about owning who you are. And the first part of that is acceptance. Acceptance is all about definitions. When Joe realised that he had been letting stuff that happened when he was 9 define who he thought he was, his whole life began to change. How many people are still living their lives by definitions that other people have forced onto them? The second part is about forgiveness. And forgiveness is really about looking at the stories and getting some distance and perspective on them. When Joe looked at his parents' stories and truly understood their motives, he couldn't be angry at them anymore. But the biggest thing with forgiveness was that he had to learn to forgive himself. The third part is responsibility, and that's the acceptance that you can't change other people. The only thing you have control about in this life is the way that you react to things. Because if I can guarantee you all one thing in this life, it's that you're going to get screwed at some point. The only control you have is over how you react to that. So I knew this chick, and her name was Sarah. And by the beautiful standard of beauty that we force onto young girls, she considered herself ugly. She spent her high school years getting teased a lot, getting pushed around by other kids, and at the age of 22, she sort of decided, I've had enough of this, I am going to be one of the beautiful people. So she started exercising, working out, watching everything she ate, taking all those pills and potions, and buying stuff off late-night infomercials. And it worked. And she was happy for a little while. Until one day she was standing in a bar surrounded by these guys, and they were all hitting on her, and she's finally getting male attention. And she asked herself, is this all there is? I mean, is this really it? Because when she looked at her life, she realised she still had every single problem that she'd had before she'd gotten skinny. All of the bills were still there, she still hated her job. And these guys who were now paying attention to her were the same guys who weren't interested in her when she was fat, and now were only interested in her because she fit a model of what they thought was beautiful. So she started on her own journey, a journey of personal discovery. And she went to all of the different world religions and philosophies and spent tens of thousands of dollars on personal development, all with no joy. Until one day it occurred to her that every answer she had been seeking was inside of her. But what had been going on the entire time was that she had been avoiding looking in the mirror. When she realised this and started to truly tap into who she was, things started to change. And one of the first places she really noticed it was the way other people treated her. When her outward reflection that she gave to people truly echoed who she was internally, all of a sudden the way people treated her changed. She was still getting attention from men, it was just a different kind of attention. Where before she'd been in group situations and she'd found that she hung back and she had that little voice in her head that's like, you're not smart enough, you're not good, just stay quiet, don't say anything, don't draw attention to yourself. Now when she was in those same situations, she would be standing up because the voices in her head were saying, dude, you have got to take care of this situation because there is no one around here as smart and as strong as you. But where she noticed the biggest difference herself was in her relationship with her little sister. Her little sister was stunningly beautiful and had always been the one who'd gotten all the attention from guys and who was gorgeous, and for years they competed with each other. And when she finally came to know herself and own herself, she didn't have to compete with her sister anymore. She realised that her sister's attractiveness and awesomeness and intelligence didn't detract from her, but added to her. So the third part of the identity principle is about living who you are. And the first part of that is outward reflection. When Sarah's outward reflection moved to actually echo the values that she held, people started to treat her differently. If you've currently got toxic people in your life, the first question you need to ask yourself is, what am I projecting? Why are they attracted to that? The second part is persuasion, particularly for entrepreneurs, but in any area of life. How high you rise is determined by your ability to persuade. But the ability to persuade, and we cop a lot of crap often as entrepreneurs about sales and being too pushy as a salesperson. Sales and persuasion come down to one thing: absolute clarity. Clarity on your vision, clarity on your values, clarity around knowing who you are. When you've got that, persuasion is a foregone conclusion. And the third part is interaction. Because, we love this world of individuality and talking about individuals, but at the end of the day, if you can't get along with other people, you're not going to end up anywhere. So I knew this guy, and I totally won't give his name because you all know him. And his life was a bit of a mess. He was 40 kilos overweight. His relationship with his wife and his kids was totally down the drain. He hated his job, but he did have one thing going for him. He was really, really good at telling everybody else what they should do with their lives. So you're around him and you're talking about your new diet and exercise plan, and he's sitting there eating his big burger meal and telling you how running isn't going to work and you should only walk places and calorie counting doesn't work either. Or you'd say that you're having problems with your relationship and he'd be straight on board to tell you all about how you should deal with your wife. Or, God forbid that you say something about starting a business, because he would tell you all about how every business fails in its first year. Nobody can ever be successful running a business. It's all just, delusion that you could possibly be successful. Then last year, disaster struck. The GFC happened and he was retrenched. His wife left him and he had a heart attack. So one day he has his daughters over for a visitation, and they're out in the back garden and they're gardening, and these girls are quite young, 8 or 9. And one of them says to him, Daddy, you are such a good teacher. You make gardening so interesting. You should do that for a job. And he's like, yeah, maybe I should. So he's got nothing better to do with his time. So he goes and books himself in to teach a gardening course at a local TAFE. From there, the classes just explode and everybody wants to be around him. And so he is then invited to speak at the State Flower and Garden Show. He ends up being offered a TV role, gets offered a book deal. Without even realising, the weight just falls off. Because all of a sudden he's active, he's happy, and he no longer needs to hide behind his weight. His relationship with his family completely changes. And the best part, he stops giving advice that isn't related to gardening. So the third part of the model is giving who you are. Now, the reason it's the fourth part is because so many people try to jump straight to giving who they are without spending time learning who they are. The first part of it is passion. If you don't know what your passion is, if you're not sure what it is that you want to do, then it's because you haven't worked through the rest of the other parts. When you know who you are, or what you're passionate about becomes really obvious really, really quickly. The models, mental models, the greatest gift we've been given as human beings is the ability to put sense to things. But that's a choice. And most people accept that it's just something that happens and it's some magical thing that happens in my brain and there's models around stuff and it just happens. But it's a choice. And the last bit is others and actually giving to other people. You can't do that until you've got the rest of it sorted out. So what are the morals of these 4 stories? Well, it's simply for anybody who has ever doubted themselves. Who've ever asked, is this all, or what's the point? There is an answer, and no amount of money you spend is ever going to give you that answer. There is a toll, and the toll is thought and action. Because the only person in the world with the power, the strength, and the need to stop you is you. Thank you.